If you care about your mental health, if you care about what you're eating, if you're one of the folks like myself who believes that those things are connected, then this is the book for you. Dr. Brooke here. This corner of the internet is called Cook with Dr. Brooke, where we talk about the connection between nutrition and mental health outcomes. I am a psychiatrist who's completed some extra certifications in nutrition. I recently read Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety, Nourish Your Way to Better Mental Health in 6 Weeks by Dr. Drew Ramsey. When I was first getting into nutritional psychiatry, I personally have begun to see that psychiatry training does not really emphasize other interventions for psychiatric management other than medications and psychotherapy, which are all very evidence-based, but there's a growing body of evidence for other interventions like diet, like exercise, like lifestyle interventions, and so I wanted to be better versed in all of those things. When I was just first getting into nutritional psychiatry, before I did like my nutritional psychiatry certification, and I was kind of doing some Googling, looking around, this name kept coming up, Dr. Drew Ramsey. His books, his lectures, his kind of work and research in the space was a recurring theme as far as like, well, if you are a mental health provider that wants to know more about nutrition, this is somebody that you should be aware of. So even going through the other courses and things that I have, it wasn't until just very recently that I actually got around to reading his main book, which is Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety. So in my review today, I'll go over what I liked, what I learned, and what I might have done differently. First of all, what I liked. There's too many to count. I really liked this book. I would highly recommend it to a lot of people. I highlighted, underlined, commented on every single chapter, cover to cover. I think there's a lot of good content in here. But I would say generally, some of the things that I liked overall with the book were that it was positive and that it was practical. What do I mean by positive? What I mean by positive is that a lot of nutritional content out there is kind of fear-mongering, where it wants you to feel bad about the way you're eating or say that there's only one right way to do things and is very do this, not that. And in the whole book, he's like, there's no one food that you need to start eating. There's no one food that you have to stop eating, but like these are going to be general trends that are going to be helpful. I just highlighted a quote here that I thought summed up a lot of kind of that positive vibe and that like progress, not perfection message that he was trying to get across. Let the experts fight about whether broccoli is nutritionally superior to kale or if Brussels sprouts have them both beat in the vitamin K department. Ultimately, whether one has more of a certain phytonutrient than the other is a moot point if people aren't willing to eat those foods in the first place. So he's like, yeah, we should worry about what we're eating, but also like don't get hung up on the small stuff and don't like lose sleep over every little thing. I think that resonates really with me, how I eat and how I try to coach my patients on eating. This book talks about the science. It talks about what's good, what's bad for us, but it doesn't do so in a fear-mongering way. It's very validating about that it's hard to change your diet. It's very understanding of that change is slow and progress is like incremental. It's very encouraging. So there are parts throughout the book where he's saying like, hey, any change you made this week, like give yourself a pat on the back, like give yourself some credit. It's very, I would say positive and encouraging in that way. Other books and other resources online, I feel like tend to be very like paternalistic and patronizing, and this is not that. Just like the general tone of the book was very positive and valid and uplifting, which I was appreciative of. And the other main thing that I liked, so 1A and 1B, is that it was very practical. So it wasn't just like, oh, well, this is how omega-3s work. It wasn't just the science and studies. He then really broke it down into like, what kinds of food groups could that look like? He gives specific recipes. He gives like a timeline for how to kind of slowly make these changes. And so it wasn't just, here's a bunch of information, now do with it what you will. He boils all of that information down into like actionable steps. He gives you specific recipes. He's mindful of people's budget. The advice in here is very tangible and I would say doable. Generally, I liked how positive it was and I liked how practical it was. Something that I learned, so there was a study in here that he cited about red meat consumption and depression in women. For context, I personally try to minimize my red meat consumption, both for like the potential health benefits of like lowering red meat in my diet, but also for environmental reasons, for budgetary reasons. It's just not a big part of my diet and I'm okay with that. I do eat some red meat, but like not a ton. And he cited a specific study in here. Women who got more than the recommended amount of red meat had higher rates of depression, but so did women that got less than the recommended amount. So there does seem to be kind of a dose-dependent relationship here. The red meat thing was pretty surprising to me because a lot of the research that I found around diet and depression talk about the Mediterranean diet, which is pretty low in red meat. So seeing studies that kind of support its use in moderation for mood support was pretty interesting to me. Now for the part where I get brutally honest and talk about everything I hated. Just kidding. Again, good book. But as far as like something that I would have liked to see more of or would have liked more emphasis on is he has this list of like the most key nutrients for depression and anxiety support. And I didn't see vitamin D on it. And now I know he and his research colleagues had a process and they had a system, and so I'm not saying you need to put vitamin D on. I'm sure they would have if it, met the parameters that they were looking for. But I will say, as somebody who practices in like the upper Midwest, where it's really cold and dark a lot of the year, it's really, really common for my patients to become vitamin D deficient. It's really common for anybody not getting sunlight to become vitamin D deficient. Like I said, they don't really get into vitamin D in here specifically, but from what I've read, vitamin D deficiency rarely in and of itself will cause an episode of depression, but we do know that people with a history of depression who then become vitamin D deficient on top of that, it's likely to exacerbate their symptoms. And it's something that's really cheap and easy to test for, and it's really cheap and easy to supplement with, and I have seen a lot of people feel a lot better after we catch a vitamin D deficiency, start supplementing that. And we don't even have to change their like psych meds or adjust other things. Like sometimes that's just the low-hanging fruit. So I would like to see a little bit more vitamin D time in here, at least as a reader, again, who lives in a cold, dark place where that does seem to be pretty important. I would like to see that emphasized more in some of the scientific overview and in some of the recipes. But overall, highly rated, would recommend to friends, family. It's not just for folks who are in a depressed episode trying to get out of it, but people who want to kind of protect their brains and maintain their mental health. If you're making other dietary changes in your life right now, either like trying to lose weight or trying to get more vegetables in or do other things, if you're already like thinking about eating healthier, like eating healthier looks different for everybody. And I would recommend reading this or following Dr. Ramsey or myself on social media platforms to learn more about like how what we're eating affects our mental health. And so if you are working on your diet, like what kinds of changes can you make that aren't just good for your body, but also for your brain? Of course, they're very closely interconnected, and a lot of those positive changes are going to be good for both, but just taking a deeper dive into a closer look at how food can affect your mood. Highly recommend reading Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety. Do you think that food affects your mental health? Do you think that's just some hippy-dippy frou-frou to try to sell you a green supplement? Not that I'm selling anything here, but people will accuse me of that. Let me know in the comments what your experience has been.